Hey y'all, welcome back to the Team LoCoFit Roundtable. This week I am joined with Training Director Ryan Conley. If you guys have not seen the new format we started last week, typically I'll just be doing a podcast with one of the coaches, and then that way we can dive into topics that are really specific for each coach, but also be able to just put out more content for you guys. So if you didn't check out last week's, we did two really, really good ones with Coach Jillian, and then this week, I'm sure these are going to be pretty mediocre with Rye, whatever, but just kidding.
I expect nothing less.
Yeah, just mediocre content this week. But actually, we do have a really good topic because it's really relevant. We had one of our clients do a powerlifting meet this weekend, and then a few weeks ago, you just did one of your meets. So I wanted to talk about weight cuts, and this is going to be relevant for any weight class athlete. So think powerlifting, Olympic lifting, I guess any kind of
Jiu-jitsu?
Yeah, that, which I'm not doing, but yes, there is, I guess, weight classes for that. And so pretty much any weight class sport. So a lot of people confuse this with just dieting in general. So making weight is completely different than losing body fat. It's completely different than looking good and peaking for a physique competition. So we wanted to kind of talk about some of the ins and outs. And this, of course, will be different for every single person. This is not something that is just like a blanket, everybody's going to have to do this. But this is what we've kind of worked around and have seen pretty good success with. So first of all, Rye, who would you say that this is for and who is this not for?
It depends who you talk to, but it's definitely not for beginning athletes or people that are just starting a new sport. Mm-hmm. There's some people that say, like in powerlifting, that if you're not going to break an all-time world record, there's no point in cutting weight. I don't fully agree with that. I mean, there's always going to be levels of competition, and everyone's always going to try and get in where they fit in to be the most competitive. So as long as you have some experience on your belt and you actually know what you're doing, then I think it's safe to at least play with weight cuts. You don't have to do – I don't cut weight for every competition I do. I only do it for ones that I want to compete in and do well at. Like if I'm just jumping into a meet for whatever reason, like when we did the New Fit study or something for fun, then I'm not going to cut weight. I'm just going to walk in and weigh whatever I weigh. But there are some other benefits to it, I believe, besides just the weight cut itself. The beneficial factor for more of an advanced athlete, in my opinion, is the ability to kind of super compensate with vitamin fluid and glycogen retention and be as big as possible on the day of competition. And I think that's a very, very important topic, but we can touch on that later.
Yeah, so I think a lot of people will think like, oh, it's the first time I'm doing something, I should try and get to the lower weight class. And while I understand that might be like I understand the intentions are good, but for a lot of people, especially beginners, it's just not really worth it because, for example, we had two other clients do powerlifting meets that were their first meets ever this year. And they were, close enough to weight classes that they could have cut, but it was like, it wasn't going to work out for them and their situation and what they had going on. It just didn't make sense. So it was much better to just say, hey, like, let's go in here and let's just, wherever you weigh, that's the weight class that you're going to do. And they both had really good meets. Now for maybe potential future ones, if they are close, we can maybe cut, and that's not going to be an issue. But for now, if you are a beginner, you're just starting out, I would say that, just get a few meets under your belt before you really, really think about that. And ultimately, if you are doing a weight class sport, you are doing sports that are performance-based. So it's not like you can just go in there and say, oh, I'll just diet and just trash myself for the 12-week prep, because then you're not going to be able to train hard, which is the whole point. So if your training is suffering because of the cut, that is going to be very, very negative. So I see a lot of clients want to do that. And, we can do a gradual diet. Like we've done that with some of the other clients and some of the other girls. And we'll do a gradual cut and, have refeeds maybe on like the harder training days and really make sure that certain things are dialed in. But as soon as it's like, hey, training is tanking, the diet is over. I don't care what weight class you're in.
Yeah, and that's a similar approach to what I took too for this last meet. We did the diet a little bit, cleaned it up. And it was always exactly based upon the performance in the gym. So on days where I worked and I wasn't training, my carbs would be a little bit lower, and then days that I trained, I would make sure that I was eating plenty of carbs and ready to go. And like you said, with previous factors, I've done weight cuts that are terrible, and I've done exactly what we were talking about when I was in high school wrestling. I was walking around at I was 171, 175, and I cut
I
cut
know that's hard to imagine, guys, but
yeah, I cut weight and basically stopped eating carbs and anything but maybe, I don't know, some protein for a month or two on end, and I got down to 158 or so, and I sucked. I got my ass beat by kids that never should have even been in the ring with me and been able to hang with me, and I was pathetic. I was a wet rag. I had no energy. I had no strength, and it was honestly pathetic to watch. It was very sad, but at the end of the tunnel, I figured out that I had to eat in order to be strong and good. And I did qualify for states that year after getting my ass beat by everyone for like a month straight.
and Ryan hasn't stopped eating since.
Exactly. I figured out the secret. So I feel for athletes that are in any kind of sport like that. I mean, powerlifting is a performance sport, jiu-jitsu, MMA, boxing, anything where you physically have to feel good the day of the competition. It's always a very fine balancing act between getting to the weight the weight class, and being your very best on the day of the meet or the day of the competition. And if you have to default to one, you always have to be defaulting to be your best on the day of competition. So that's a very important take.
Yeah, so when in doubt, probably don't cut. But if you are more advanced and you are close, and you are trying to, you know, hit a certain PRs or maybe hit a total or something like that, it's going to be a little bit different. Now, I know we have talked about percentages of weight cuts. And again, these are pretty loose because everybody will be different. But what is the percentage that you feel pretty comfortable with is not a really hard cut? And we're talking about now like the last week. This is not like over the course of a meet.
This is just fluid manipulation.
This is fluid manipulation. Like how much is a easy weight cut?
So I think anything around 5% or under is very doable. Like 3% is a cakewalk. So I think anywhere between 3 and 5% is a very manageable cut. We start getting up to closer to 10%. That's when the weight cut gets very drastic and it can take extreme measures.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely going to need an IV bag or something to rehydrate the following day. So that's going to take, that's a little bit more, complicated and more variables.
Yeah. So, and we'll talk about kind of meet week, like the week leading up with the weight cut. I want to do that, but everybody has to remember too, like you are cutting weight, which is hard, but a lot of people are like, oh, I can get over that. But the day after you weigh in is the most important. So if you're not ready, like even if you have a crazy weight cut and you're like, no, I can cut 10%. Well, you better be 10% plus by the end of that day so that you can actually go into the meet or the match in a better position. Because if you cut a bunch and then you're only back up a few pounds, well, now you've really
you're still at a detriment.
Yeah, you're nowhere.
You're still in the negative.
Get back. So just kind of walk us through like week out from a weight, like the weigh-ins. What would you typically say to start with?
So about a week out, you're going to want to increase your fluid intake, your water intake, at least double it. Minimum is double it. You're also going to increase your sodium because with the fluid intake, you're going to need to increase the sodium so that you're not going hyponatremic and flushing out all of your electrolytes. So with increased water, you need to make sure that your electrolytes are increased as well so that you try and maintain some of that fluid that you're drinking.
Yeah. And the goal at this point is to retain everything. So if you've been weighing in, let's say 150 pounds or 200 pounds, whatever it might be, and you go up a few pounds, that's okay at this point, which is kind of scary for people because they're like, wait, I'm supposed to lose weight. Why am I upping this? But if you increase water and you increase sodium by about double for a few days, it's going to go up. But the whole point is to really saturate the system and to really kind of upregulate everything.
So you're going to weigh more at the end of the second sodium and water loading day. It's called a loading day or loading days. Your diet should be similar. You can start to reduce carbs depending on how much percentage of body weight you need to cut. So the diet is really going to be dependent upon how much weight you have to cut. So if you're closer, you probably don't really have to change that much in your diet. If you're further away, you should start reducing carbohydrates already. And now the following 2 days after that, you're going to decrease sodium and decrease fluid. So we're going to cut the fluid back down to normal intake and or less and try and reduce sodium as much as possible, so to negligible amounts. and you're going to start reducing carbohydrates as well. Now, the final day prior to the weigh-ins, which is going to be the second day of low fluid, low carb, low sodium, is also going to be dependent on how much weight you need to cut, body weight you need to cut percentage-wise. You may be fasting literally that entire day and that night, until fasting food and fasting water until the weigh-ins the following morning. And then that's when you have to rehydrate. So depending on how much you have to cut is going to be dependent on when you start the low carb, and also dependent on when you're going to have to start fasting. So,
Yeah.
And I think the fasting's cool just because it gives you a competitive reason to actually get a fast in. So think about Dr. Dom and all that fasting stuff.
Yeah, there is good research on fasting. Not to say that you have to do it or that it's necessary. And normally a fast would have water, obviously.
Yeah, that makes it way worse when you can't
this
drink.
is not recommended as like a, if you are going to do fast regularly, please drink water. Obviously for these extreme circumstances, this is just one day that you're doing it. And this is the least amount of, basically you want to be this depleted for as few days as possible. So that's why we're saying, hey, don't just diet the whole training cycle, because we'd rather you get 5 pounds off the last week. It's just literally fluid manipulation. But for a weight class sport and a performance-based sport, that is completely different than somebody who's just dieting and wants to look better. And just for example, our client who just did this, who's a normal sized female, fluctuated almost 10 pounds within just a few days of the weight cut.
That was big.
She did just
that. The scale might be a little bit different, but it's still a big fluctuation.
It was a big fluctuation, and because she did everything right, like she nailed it completely. And I obviously can't speak to other sports besides weightlifting sports. But in those sports, the week before, you're not really training that much. So when you are cutting, your food in the last few days and you are fasting, it's not like you're going in and training. So you're not really doing anything detrimental. I have no idea with like MMA and all those kind of things, like what they're doing as far as training goes, but I would imagine it's still less. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's still going to be tapered.
Yes, you're still going to taper. So when people are hearing that and they think, oh my gosh, this just sounds so drastic, this is actually the least drastic thing that you can do, because you're prioritizing training the whole cycle. And then, hey, the last few days when you're virtually not training at all, you're just kind of relaxing, this is when you're going to really, really do these manipulations. And as a last case resort, you can use the sauna or steam baths to get weight off. And this time you did pretty good. You didn't need it for your meet, but do you want to tell them about
I used one, but
well, yeah, but it
wasn't bad at all. It was relaxing. It was like a good hot bath before.
Yeah, like one is nice, but the last meet prep you did, oh my fucking God. You had to cut a lot, and you weighed a lot going into it. And you hadn't been like, like cleaning up your diet whatsoever. And it was like 3 days, I think, of like pretty low food. And then it was like 36 hours of like no food and water. And I think it was like 8 or 9 like sauna and bath rotation. Yeah. And normally, like, you're pretty good and pretty coherent, but like, oh, I'm a little tired. You were so out of it. Like, he's like, hey, I hadn't planned on driving him in the morning. Like, no big deal. But he's like, hey, you're gonna have to drive me. I was like, what are you talking about? I was like, I have to go. And I was like, oh. And then I started realizing, like, as you were talking, like how delusional you were. And I was like, yeah, you're not allowed to drive. And then I woke up and you're like, I haven't slept all night. I've been doing this. And then I was like, holy shit. Like, so obviously and anybody who's dieted for a competition prep, which is again completely different, but when you're just starving, your body will keep you awake, right? So like when you are fasting, a lot of times people will not be able to sleep very well because of just like the adrenaline dump, and your body is like, hey, we're super sympathetic. Wake up, go eat, go drink something, please go keep us alive. So it's very common for that day to not sleep as well. And then, this last time was fine, but the time before it, holy shit, you were like, I haven't slept all night, and I was thinking about this idea, and then I was in the bath, and then I had the music on. I was like, okay, all right, let's go to weigh-ins.
Secondary thing, if you do any kind of harsher weight cut in any kind of heat,
be safe.
Be safe, and for God's sakes, let someone like make sure that you have a partner, like somebody with you, making sure that you're going to stay alive, because I know personally people that have been just as messed up as I've been, or worse, and they're extremely dehydrated. You're not thinking straight, and you can really cause permanent damage to yourself, to your brain, also along with the internal organs.
Yeah.
So it's really not a joke. You have to have something.
Not worth it.
What you're doing, and I should have woken her up and let her know I was going to start getting into the hot bath again. but it was so early. It was probably 4 or 5 o'clock that I had to start over again. That I didn't want to wake her up yet. So,
and he was 242 on the dot. It was crazy.
yeah,
But so yeah, so definitely learned from that weight cut, because this past one was much
way
easier.
easier.
And just in general. So, tighten up the diet a little bit beforehand, which is a good tool if somebody is, a little bit far off and knows what kind of weight class they want to be in, but not at the detriment of performance. So very strategically had enough carbs on training days, so that performance was not hindered whatsoever. Got down to a better weight, so the cut was a lot easier. And again, these are very general recommendations, you guys. This is something that we do use with clients. We do peak a lot of people and cut a lot of people for their events. But again, this is not our first line of defense. If somebody is a beginner, do not cut. It is not worth it. Just go in and do your best and have fun.
There's way too many things to worry about.
So many things to worry about. Like the meet that I did, I don't even remember what I weighed in. I just was like, I don't even know what I weigh. I'm just going to show up and see what weight class I'm in. You know what I mean? And then if I ever do a jiu-jitsu tournament or whatever the fuck it's match tournament, I will definitely not be cutting. But, again, like when you're a beginner, it just doesn't make sense. So that's the first rule. If you are going to be cutting, have somebody look this over as a coach. Obviously, like a competition peak week, a lot of people know like, oh, that's pretty serious. But a lot of people think for a weight class cut, they're just like, whatever, I just won't eat. It's like, oh, there's a little bit more to it. And you really should have somebody monitoring you. So even if you have to hire somebody just for that, it would be very beneficial. And I'll just say one thing, like we're not really big on the whole like crazy diuretic stuff. And obviously prescription air quotes, people still have them, but I would just not really recommend that, because those can really cause some long-term damage. So if you can't get the weight off with the water and sodium and food changes and some saunas, like you were just too far off. It's really not worth it for like 99.9% of people.
Yeah, that's when you get to the best in the world, and they don't need to be listening to this. They have people that are going to help them do it. So
exactly. And then now you've weighed in, and for most, again, can't speak to all sports, but a lot of sports now are 24 hours. I think even wrestling and like MMA and all that is like longer than it used to be, right? Like I think
they keep changing. I know UFC has been 24 hours for a long time. Amateur wrestling is like 2 hours prior.
Oh, okay. Just kidding. So that's not good. But I thought high schools were longer. No.
No, we wait right before we compete.
I know. I thought it was just because of so much unhealthy shit that was going on. But anyways, so if you're not in high school and you're listening to this, you
have to weigh in the following day too. They give you an allowance, a weight allowance. So if it's a 2-day tournament, you weigh in the first day, and then the following day you might get a pound or two. So you can't like blow up the night of after competition.
Interesting. Okay, so for not that, for for everything else, you're typically going to have around 24 hours. So what are the next? But just back up. So if you do have a 2-hour weight cut, let's just say that none of this is going to be relevant. You know what I mean? Like you should not eating for 24 hours.
Like, 2 to 3% max. I wouldn't do anything over 3%. And as soon as you step off the scale, I mean, you should be doing this with a 24-hour weigh-in too. As you step off a scale with a 2-hour weigh-in, if you've done any kind of fluid manipulation, you need to be pounding carbohydrates,
electrolytes,
and water and sodium.
Immediately.
Basically like a diluted Gatorade, G2 or something, electrolyte pills, and getting easy carbs in to try and put the weight back on. It's doable, but it's just a lot tighter a window and less weight you can cut.
Yeah, less weight you can cut. So let's just say you do have a 24-hour weigh-in, and you have made a 5%, maybe even a little bit higher of a drop. What should people expect to do that day? I mean, I know the answer, but
so you mentioned earlier, you have to put all of the weight back on that you lost. If you do not put the weight back on that you lost, and you're training at a body weight that's lighter than what you've been training at the entire time, you will be weaker. You will feel like shit. Your performance will suffer. So you need to at least for strength sports like powerlifting, strongman, whatever, ideally you want to actually blow up beyond whatever your average training weight was. For competitive events like jiu-jitsu and whatever, I would just get back to your normal weight. You don't need to be extra bloated or extra holding extra weight at all. So you want to just be at the same weight that you train at. For strength sports, you want to be as big as possible. You want basically to do the opposite of what bodybuilders do. You actually spill over. So you want fluid into interstitial space and not just being retained in the muscle and glycogen. You want to actually spill over and be as large as you can possibly be on your body frame.
Yeah. Strength sports are all based on leverages, not all, but
and I don't know if people still debate about this and stuff. I don't think it's even up for a debate for personal anecdotal reasons and talking to other very experienced, like, best lifters in the entire world. It makes you feel safer. It makes you feel stronger. The muscle and the tissues are almost like binded together when you're lifting something, and you just feel so tight that you can explode. It's really just a matter of going in and feeling weak and going in and feeling like you can run through a wall. So if you can ideally get a couple pounds above your training weight, that would be the goal. So you're going to have to eat literally all day, drink literally all day, and take naps throughout that entire session. You think I'm kidding when I say literally all day, but it should be probably like 4 big main meals and then snacks in between those. And I'll drink 2 to 3 gallons of Gatorade with 70 to 80 grams of carbs per gallon, along with 8 grams of sodium per gallon of water. And
that's the Gatorade powder that you make your own gallon.
Yeah. And I'll literally always hit a new weight PR on blowing that bloat session that night. I think I weighed in at 239 this past competition, and I went to bed 264, 265. So
yeah,
that's a big fluctuation, but I felt great the day of the meet.
Exactly. And that's what matters. So it's going to depend on the person. And I know, just for women in particular, a lot of people don't want to feel bloated or whatever. But if you are doing this really drastic cut, you're going to need to do that. And because the day of the meet, you're not really going to eat as much, most likely. You still need to eat and drink on the day of the meet, but it's not going to be like, that's not the day you want to be pounding food. You want to be doing it the day before. So then that way, when you wake up, you feel good, you have a big breakfast, and then you kind of keep it moving. It's kind of, again, it's very similar, but so different to peaking for a bodybuilding show. You want to wake up ready. You know what I mean? Like, you don't want to wake up and go, oh shit, I still need to fill out. Now, if you need to, you have time, but ideally you've peaked properly to where you wake up and you're good to go. And now you're just kind of maintaining for the rest of the day. So, day after, girls, hydrate, take a lot of electrolytes, and eat food. So for some people, that's like no issue at all. But for others, we've seen when people are like, oh, I don't want to do that. It's like, well, you're going to,
I feel uncomfortable.
Yeah. That's the point. You know what I mean?
I don't care.
We don't care. Feel uncomfortable. That is like what you need.
Feel uncomfortable while you're breaking PRs.
Yeah. And again, we're talking about now strength sports. So not speaking, I would imagine feeling super bloated and disgusting and then going and rolling would not be the best option.
Yeah, not a great idea.
No, but this is, now we're talking about just the strength sport aspect of it. So yeah, I think that's kind of covers everything, right?
Sure.
Yeah. Yes. No. Okay. So yeah, guys, just to kind of recap, if you're a beginner, don't try this. If you're more advanced, give this a go, but make sure that you do have somebody who is intelligent in your corner that you can rely on and, walk you through the process. It is something that does need to be taken seriously. And it's not just a joke of like, let me just not eat and drink and see what happens. If you don't have a plan, it's going to end miserably and you're going to really not do well at the meet outside of just like not feeling good either. So if you guys have any questions about this, please let us know. If you have not already subscribed and given us a review, please do that. We're on iTunes, Spotify, and YouTube, and we would really appreciate 10 stars, only 10 stars. And if you guys haven't got the joke by now, you haven't listened to the other podcast. So thank you so much for tuning in. We really appreciate it. If you have any other questions for us or want to read articles, see other podcasts, apply for coaching, go to teamlocofit.com. We have all that information on there. And have a great day.
Bye.
Bye.